Welcome to the Digital Patient, where we discuss the latest advancements in digital patient engagement and share stories from the front lines. I'm your host, Alan Sardana, and with me, as always, is SeamlessMD CEO, Dr. Joshua Liu. Today, we're joined by our very special guest, Dr. Gregg Nicandri. Dr. Nicandri currently serves as the Chief Medical Information Officer of the University of Rochester Medical Center. That's an 8-hospital, $4 billion health system. As the first system CMIO, Dr. Nicandri established and grew a clinical informatics team that drives provider and system technology and workflow adoption, resulting in meaningful improvements in patient and provider experience and high-value care. He's also a practicing orthopedic surgeon, which enables him to experience and understand on a deeper level the changes his team makes and its impact on his colleagues, family, and community. Dr. Nicandri received his medical degree from Virginia Commonwealth University, completed an orthopedic surgery residency with the University of Washington, and went on to complete his fellowship in sports medicine and shoulder surgery with Duke University. Dr. Nicandri, Gregg, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan and Joshua. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. It's so awesome to have you on the show. You've shared in the past, I think it was a previous conversation, as far back as you can remember, you always wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. And so I was really curious to start the conversation, like, where did that drive come from?
So it's a little bit of a long story. I'll try to give you the abridged version, but like most orthopedic surgeons, it starts out with an injury. And so I grew up local in Rochester, one of the suburbs called Webster, and I went sledding with my family down Suicide Hill. And instead of hitting the jump on Suicide Hill, I ran into a tree at the bottom of Suicide Hill and fractured my femur. And ended up at Strong Memorial Hospital, which is where I work right now, on the children's ward. And this was at age 5. And back then, we didn't really do surgery for that. So I was actually in the hospital for 3 full weeks in traction.
Wow.
And my orthopedic surgeon, Dr. McAllister Everts, would come by and round with his team every day. And one day he came by with my x-ray and showed it to me and said, "Hey, Gregg, do you see where your fracture is?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I think it's right there." And of course, it was a compound fracture, severely shortened, angulated, biggest bone in the body, super easy to see. But of course, being the great doctor that Dr. Everts was, he was like, "Wow, that's really good, Gregg. You should be an orthopedic surgeon when you grow up." And so really, like, from right there, that kind of stuck in the back of my head.
Wow.
That's what I wanted to do. And then, my parents recently moved, and they came over and dumped a bunch of stuff from the basement into my basement. And one of those things was an 8th grade meeting with my guidance counselor that said, "Gregg wants to be an orthopedic sports medicine surgeon. We recommend that he takes Latin," and yada, yada, yada. And so I guess, I'm just really lucky that everything kind of worked out. It was always something I was interested in. I always pursued other things to kind of try them, but it always came back to orthopedic surgery and sports medicine in particular.
Wow. That's a very aptly named hill that you went sledding on.
Yeah.
Jeez. Oh, that's awesome. So, also from what I could tell, you've always been a strong advocate for shifting kind of the traditional surgical training paradigm, the see one, do one, teach one, to more of a prepare, practice, and perfect. And I think it was way back in 2013, maybe even earlier, you were already explaining the benefits of virtual reality and using simulation technology to, really train properly and prepare surgeons for their training in conjunction with, I think it was the ASSET tool, the arthroscopic surgical skill evaluation tool. So with that, I have a 3-part question. Like, one, that was a long time ago. That was like 10 years ago at least. So first, I was curious, how did you find out about virtual reality technology for surgical training? And then 2, why do you believe in this tech and in addition to these evaluation tools for our future surgeons? And then the last question I have is how has this technology evolved since the time when you were first introduced to it, over a decade ago?
Yeah, so I think, it even started out, the interest was peaked in my residency because I think, the lay public and myself at that point didn't really understand how surgeons are trained and credentialed in America. And it just struck me that there was kind of a wide variety of surgical skill amongst surgeons who were doing similar procedures, and that when we trained residents, we assessed their knowledge by giving them a test or having them sit for a board exam, and that all of a sudden said, okay, you're good, you can practice surgery on patients, or you can do surgery on patients. But there was never really any assessment of their technical ability or skill. And me, as somebody who was trying to learn fundamental skills, I never knew kind of where I was on that curve. Was I good? Did everybody have the same experience as me? Because you actually go through residency almost in isolation. You do it with yourself, with a preceptor in the operating room, but you don't know really how you compare or where you are in your learning curve in comparison to others. And so I got very interested in that and really started thinking about, okay, how can we assess surgical technical skill better, and that led to the arthroscopic surgery skill evaluation tool, because I felt like once you have a more objective assessment, and at that time, years and years ago, I did a thorough literature search just assuming that there would be one, and there really wasn't. And so we kind of went about developing our own. And then once we had a tool to actually assess skill, then we could go back and say, okay, how can we evaluate different curriculums against each other? Or beyond curriculums, how can we evaluate different simulation methodologies against each other to determine which one is the most effective and efficient and yields the most transfer to actual real operating room skill? And that interest kind of followed me into fellowship, where another great mentor of mine, Bill Garrett, directed me to say, hey, you're really interested in curriculum and evaluation of surgical technical skill, and the Arthroscopy Association of North America is working with some simulation companies on developing a new simulator. And so that really got me connected with that group, and just kind of started and progressed from there. And I think a lot has really changed over time. So there, when we started, it was really, we've got cool technology and we're looking for a problem to solve with that cool technology. And as orthopedic surgeons, we were just kind of jumping into the technology world. And so we kind of said, all right, well, let's use this cool technology to simulate every aspect of a knee arthroscopy so that you can do the entire thing virtually. And what we learned was that the simulator simulated some aspects of arthroscopic surgery really well. But you still couldn't, even as good as the haptics were on some of those things, you couldn't completely mimic the normal look and feel and some of the unexpected things that happen during surgery to really make it a true, fully simulated experience. But then, thinking just evolved over time, and you started to figure out, all right, well, I maybe don't need a super high fidelity virtual reality simulator to train some of these things. Maybe some things are trained better with just the curriculum and the reading material. Some can be trained with the low fidelity. Like I think now a lot of the haptic stuff, you really want to use the real instruments that you're using and practice putting in implants the way you normally would. But then to really understand procedural steps and make sure that you know what normal looks like and what abnormal looks like and what the common pearls and pitfalls are, virtual reality simulation is great for that. And it's become a lot more ubiquitously available and generalizable. And so I'm excited for the future of that for sure.
And Greg, just to kind of summarize that a little bit, that was an amazing introduction to it. Thank you for that. So it sounds like for things that you're saying, maybe in terms of getting the procedural steps right, there's a role that can be played with this technology. Is part of it too that for certain procedures that are less common, where it's hard to get volume in, does this play an important role, or is that not so much the case?
I think it depends on what kind of simulation that you're talking about, right? So that's a problem that you're trying to solve, and now you have to figure out, okay, of the technologies available to us now, what's the best way to solve that problem? So do you invest, $100,000 in a very complicated simulator so that a surgeon can perform that procedure twice every 5 years? Probably not. What I find is that, a lot of with practicing surgeons, you kind of have the basic fundamental skills. Like, how hard do you press with a knife to make the surgical incision? How do you, in orthopedics, insert a screw into the bone? How do you drill? How do you insert guide wires to hit your target? As you do that stuff over and over again, those things translate to lots of other procedures, and those are the main haptic skills. So once you're actually in practice, I think the most important thing is actually learning the steps of the procedure and how the implant gets put together and what normal anatomy looks like, what abnormal anatomy looks like, and what recreated anatomy looks like after you're done with the surgical procedure. And I think that's where, virtual reality simulation with a headset can be very effective if it's tied to a curriculum that has the different steps and proficiency benchmarks built in. Like, you need to hit all the steps in order within a certain time frame to be proficient, so that you're almost not even thinking about it. So you've kind of released that cognitive load of all of the steps, and I think that benefits you as a practicing surgeon when you get into the operating room with the patient, so you can focus on the other nuances of the procedure as opposed to that other stuff that before, you would have to read a technique guide, and maybe you'd read it once before you went in and did the procedure, or you'd watch a video on ViewMedi. But doing something in the VR world where you can do it 100 times over and over and over again and complete all the steps in 2.5 minutes, to be able to do that, you've got to really know what you're doing. And I think there's a lot of benefit to that.
Gotcha. I love how something you referenced, I think, a few times here is it's not so important to just implement technology for the sake of implementing it. It's important to understand, like, what is the problem to be solved, and then does a certain technology actually solve it? So you seem like a very practical person in terms of your approach to technology. In 2019, you became the CMIO for University of Rochester. Was there a problem you were trying to solve when you took on that role, or what was the backstory to that?
So that it kind of happened via happenstance, I think. We were searching for a chief medical information officer, and at that time, the problem for my colleagues, I think, was frustration with electronic health record and burnout. We had implemented Epic years before, and we didn't really have a chief medical information officer for a while, and so we hadn't optimized Epic to meet real-time clinical workflows, and so it wasn't working for our clinical faculty, and they were frustrated. And I had gotten involved as a physician builder for the Department of Orthopedics. I had started making some changes within our departmental e-record, and I think that was largely seen as being pretty successful, and I enjoyed seeing my colleagues be happier and more efficient and be able to get home, dinner families, and things like that, and started to realize, okay, I can have a really broad impact on my colleagues and my patients and my community that I grew up in, and so that impact is what caused that job opening to become more appealing to me. And so I decided, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring. It's another level of leadership. It's something that I really wasn't considering. So if you asked me, 6 years ago, was I going to be a CMIO, I would have said no. I was kind of like, this is a good opportunity and something that I might enjoy. And I was like, you know what, if I'm not good at it and I stink, I can always fall back on, a pretty great job in being an orthopedic sports medicine surgeon. And over time, as I stepped into the role and started taking on more and more of the challenges, I've just found that I've enjoyed it more and more and more. And it's that impact that kind of keeps me coming back. And I think the problem, honestly, is still the same. COVID maybe kind of changed things a little bit, but the provider burnout problem that we have, may have been predominantly caused by electronic health record previously. Now it's caused by lots of other things, but it's exemplified. Now that we have the staffing shortages and a lot of the stuff that's going on right now, I would say burnout's at an all-time high, and we need to get even better at doing what we were trying to do before.
Can I ask you, like, you've been doing this for, I guess, formally for, over 3, almost 4 years now. How has the role of the CMIO kind of evolved from your perspective? So I'll give you an example. Like, I've heard some CMIOs say to us, well, over the past decade, it was really focused on either implementing or optimizing the EHR and improving, life for the clinicians. And now with digital health transformation involving patients more and more lately, especially since COVID, the CMI role for some people has evolved to be more, patient engagement or remote monitoring or just touching the patient more than it did before. How do you think about that evolution over the last couple of years?
So I think about it very similarly. I think, CMIO 1.0 was, implement the EHR and help get everything moving in that direction. Then the EHR is implemented. You have a bunch of disgruntled physicians. So CMIO 2.0 was optimize and enhance the EHR to make workflows better. And then COVID happened and really accelerated the digital health transformation. And the CMIO got involved a lot more in strategy. And so I think a lot of my role started to be helping with our chief digital officer and forming strategic partnerships with technology innovators to try to really move our vision forward. And also, there's a big role in data and analytics because our ability to generate insights that actually improve care right at the bedside is greater than it has ever been. There's so much potential there. I think the problem is that we've got way, way, way too much data, and we're probably not asking the right questions, going back to what I was talking about before. What are the problems you want to solve? And how do you ensure that you have good data going in and insights going out at the right time to the right person through the right channel? And I think that's something that can only be solved through a partnership with technology and informatics, making sure that the workflows are supported with technology that's configured appropriately.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Greg, you mentioned, CMIO 2.0 is the era of let's optimize our EHR and, get all the processes to ensure that the workflows are all simplified. And I know you've mentioned in the past how you're a proponent of that sometimes means optimization through deleting processes. And it sounds almost like an addition by subtraction. And I think that's such an interesting paradox that really does ring true. So I'm curious, could you explain what's one example of a process that you've actually just completely eliminated from the workflow? And what was the impact of doing that kind of an optimization through elimination?
Yeah, so it's challenging to take stuff away from people, even when they don't like it, right? So, probably our biggest initiative aimed at deletion was just around clinical decision support and BPAs. So, 2 years ago, we had sepsis BPAs firing every 5 minutes as soon as you opened up the chart, and we were ignoring 98% of them, and so they just weren't effective BPAs. And so we, formed a team, a clinical decision support team, and basically started looking at all of our BPAs, and we established different criteria for what's a good BPA and what's not a good BPA. And then started eliminating them. And so over time, we actually just our informatics team got t-shirts this year because we had like over 2.4 million clicks eliminated this year or something. We had these like McDonald's themed t-shirts that we handed out this year. So that was a really good initiative. We did a DC the CC, getting rid of the CC'd result notification. So, we were automatically CCing pretty much all result notes to our physical or to our primary care physicians. So this is, any chart for any provider or patient that was seen by any provider got CC'd. Any lab that was ordered by anybody got CC'd. And their in baskets were just absolutely getting deluged. But the interesting thing about that was when we said, hey, we're going to turn all these things off from you, there was a very vocal 5 to 10% that were like, no, I need that. And I think those are the people that are kind of like, they're, for lack of a better word, they're like the hoarders. Like you feel like you always need that. But if that is buried in 7,000 other results, are you ever actually really going to see it? Is that the most effective way to get it? And so we kind of went back to our best practice recommendation, which is actually saying if you're the ordering provider, you're responsible for following up on that result, and that comes to your in-basket. If there's an abnormal result that you think that PCP needs to be made aware of, then you actively click a button and CC that to that person. And so instead of that being a needle in a haystack for the PCP, they actually get it and they see it and can do something about it.
It kind of reminds me of one of the terms that I learned this year. I forget from who, but it was the concept of the Antipilot, where what you're piloting is an elimination. And the idea would be that if we take this thing away, let's see what happens. If it ends up, impacting, patient care in a negative way, or it leads to more frustration, we can always bring it back. But if we take this workflow or thing away and it doesn't lead to anyone complaining or it doesn't cause a problem, then I guess we didn't need it. And so even things like, do we need this recurring meeting every month? Well, let's get rid of it for a month or 2 or 3 and see what happens. And like, oh, wait, everyone's still collaborating really well. I guess we didn't need it after all. And maybe you needed that for 6 months or a year before because things were rocking, you're figuring things out, but then you hit a maintenance moment where you didn't need it, but you just kept it on the calendar. So it makes me wonder, like, what are all these things that we could anti-pilot in the health system and then bring it back if we have to, and it's okay?
I think it's really hard in healthcare for some reason for folks to recognize the difference between one-way and two-way doors. We always feel like if we turn something on, it can never be turned off again. When in reality, you can always go back if it's a bad idea. In very few cases is it we're heading in this direction and it's forever fated to be that way. And I think it's important when you're deleting stuff to recognize, we can always turn that back on if it doesn't work or leads to some dissatisfaction that we don't know about, because we get caught up in the what ifs. Like instead of solving the 10,000 what ifs, how about we actually just turn it off and see what happens for a little bit, and then we can always just turn it back on.
Absolutely. One of the things that you've been really invested in is this HEART program. It's University of Rochester's Health Equity and Anti-Racism Technology program that focused on eliminating variation and providing quote unquote same care to enable more equitable outcomes for patients using tech. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? It sounds pretty exciting.
Yeah, so we started this up now probably 2 years ago, just recognizing that, we have all these care protocols and you're trying to apply them to every patient who comes in. And so everybody is getting same care. But that fails to recognize that humans are all individuals, and some individuals need stuff that is slightly different or differing levels of assistance to achieve the same health outcome. And so kind of shifting that mindset through the utilization of different technologies and tools was how we sought out to do that. And so we had an issue where our demographics collection methodology was kind of flawed. So, the first thing was we wanted to collect data on our patients to understand them more. We wanted to make that data visible. So we said collect, visualize, connect was our strategy. So we wanted to collect data. We wanted to make that data visible within the workflow to the physicians who were taking care of that patient because, as a provider, we know Rochester is one of the most impoverished cities in the country. We have the highest child poverty rate in the entire country, and everybody knows that. But you, as the provider who is taking care of a child, do you know whether that actually impacts that kid that's sitting in front of you in your office? And can you figure that out in the 15 minutes that you have to be able to talk and evaluate them? And so making that information available to the physician at the point of care so that they can consider those factors along with the treatment plan that they're going to be offering them, I think is very important. And then, the connect piece was basically trying to tie in resources for patients when they have identified needs to be able to make those available within the electronic health record. And so we, partnered with our local 211 to get that resource directory available in the EHR. We stood up programs for housing, food, and transportation within the hospital because we recognized those as our biggest needs. And so once those needs were identified, we were able to get people hooked up with those care management programs. And we're also teaming with our community-based organizations who are fantastic on trying to figure out ways of doing closed-loop referrals kind of on down the line. So I think we've, kind of had an issue where our data was not good, so we had to revamp our intake forms. We had to get folks to buy in to how we were going to ask those questions, why we were asking those questions, why they wanted to answer them, why we needed them to update them. And that flowed into also asking the social determinants of health questions. I would say the biggest barrier we had, though, was that physicians kind of pushed back a little bit initially when we said, hey, we're going to start asking social determinants. We're going to ask about food insecurity, transportation insecurities. The physician said, I can't give the patient a pill for that. And I've got 15 minutes to have a conversation with them, and I don't want to spend 10 minutes talking about something that I can't solve and that they can't solve, and we're just there kind of wringing our hands. And so that's where the 2-on-1 thing came in, because it allowed us to say, all right, we've got a resource that we're putting in. We know it's not ideal to just give somebody a handout and say, hey, call this number, but it's at least something. And, oh, by the way, our messaging to you as a provider is not that this is your problem to solve. This is our health system's problem. This is our community's problem. And we are doing other things to try to solve this for our patients and our patient population. What we're asking of you as a clinician is to take the information that we're giving you so that you know that patient on a deeper level, consider the treatment plan that you're offering them, and try to figure out whether any of the social determinants may impact that treatment plan and may make you think of offering something slightly different. So I think we were able to get good buy-in that way. And then once we started having patients identified with needs, that drove which programs we were going to set up. And things have kind of snowballed from there in a very successful way.
And Greg, I'm curious, at this point, have you reached a situation or a program where, let's say you're collecting these new data points on social determinants of health, and you're able to maybe flag things that are risk factors for a disparity or a bad outcome. Are we at the point where, based on what's flagged, decision supports actually automatically recommending different approaches to the treatment protocol or the care pathway? Or is it mostly still, hey, we're flagging this for something to be aware of, and use this in your assessment to potentially change the pathway or the protocol? Or are we actually automating some of these clinical decision support pieces based on the determinants of health?
So we're not at the point in our organization really where we're automating. I think that's where we all hope to get to. But I think all of these things need to stay in a kind of a a stepwise process. It's just like the evolution of AI. Everybody wants it to be this fully autonomous thing, but really there needs to be engagement and partnership. And I think obviously that's best um, for healthcare. I think we do have some things outside of the social determinants where we are, we built a decision support tool pre-operatively for patients in orthopedic surgery around our bundles for our total joints. And we realized, one of the biggest factors leading to higher cost was obviously going to a skilled nursing facility post-surgically. And we asked all of our patients promise questionnaires pre-surgically on pain interference, physical function, and mood, as well as getting some information about social support at home. And we have a little tool that goes right into the electronic health record that is a sniff predictor tool. So when you're considering signing that patient up for surgery, you can say, hey, you don't want to have to go to a skilled nursing facility after. Most patients want to be at home if they possibly can be. And we say, if you do, these 3 or 4 things, you can actually dial in different factors on that tool to say, hey, if I do this, like if I set up visiting nurse or I set up family caregiver coming, what are the chances that they're going to need to go to a sniff? And you can see that kind of go down on the dial. So that's a tool that clinicians kind of grew to trust because they could interact with it. They knew which data was going into that tool. They could manipulate it a little bit to see different outcomes, and it facilitated a conversation with the patient so that you could deliver the care and kind of hospital course and outcome that they expected. Because now they said, okay, I'm not really expecting to go home, or I'm expecting that I'm going to need to go to a skilled nursing facility, and we should have these things set up beforehand.
Yeah, that's great. I had a question, Greg. It sounds like a lot of, whether it's a new workflow that you're implementing or a new technology or, just a specific change, a lot of it comes down to change management amongst the staff and clinicians. Do you have any like best practices or just, 1 or 2 principles that, if you get this right, then change management is at least easier?
Yeah, so I love this. This is where everybody falls down. So this is like, I think the biggest area for improvement, and change management is a fundamental skill for every organization. And I don't think that we necessarily do this well in hospitals. So I love the ADKAR method of change management. The key thing that you need to do initially is to listen. And so you've got to go out and you have to listen and try to figure out what is the pain that people are experiencing. And as you then go to build awareness for what you're trying to do, the key is shifting awareness of what your intervention is to get people to actually desire. You need to build that desire. And what builds the desire is identifying for your audience the what's in it for me. And that's a different thing for physicians than administrators, than operators. So a perfect example of this is like our secure chat rollout. So the initial messaging around our secure chat when it came across my desk as a draft was, we're rolling out this new secure HIPAA compliant messaging platform for providers. All of your patient and provider info will be safe. And I'm like, that's not really what the providers are telling me they need. What the providers hate is that they get random pages in the middle of the night to call back 14534. And they work at 9 hospitals. They have no idea what extension 14534 is. They have no idea what patient it's about. They don't know who the person is that's actually paging them. and now it's woken them up at 2 in the morning. And so they have to walk and go answer that. And so, what we were really using Secure Chat for was to fix that. You can actually dial in the level of interruptivity. So if this is just the lab saying that, or the pharmacy saying that, hey, we dispensed 120 pills instead of 122 like you prescribed, they can send that as an FYI that now doesn't wake you up in the middle of the night because it's not associated with a breakthrough notification alert. When you get it, you know who sent it to you, what patient it was about every single time, and you can respond mobily on your mobile device. So now you don't have to go to a computer, or worse, go to a phone,
Right.
wait for somebody to pick up on the other end, wait for that person to find the person who actually called you, which might be 5 to 10 minutes, and actually complete the process.
Right.
So that is what physicians want and what they've been asking for. And so with change management, you need to understand that physicians need to understand that that is what you're delivering to them with this particular tool. If you're advertising to the security team and you're giving the same talk about secure chat, you're telling them, hey, you want secure chat because it's going to protect the data and be more HIPAA compliant. And I think, with all of our initiatives, it's very important to understand that you've got to dial in your what's in it for me and your messaging. I think we fall down on we don't get to awareness soon enough. We don't build the desire. And so we usually just start right at the, here's the tool that we're going to give you and here's the training. And then we also don't go back and reinforce the change after. And so the way that we do that is we make sure that we have KPIs with our initiative. We're tracking how we're doing, and if we're starting to fall off, like with our social determinants of health, we started taking that on every patient, every inpatient admission, and we had 70% compliance the first couple of weeks, and then it started to go down to 50, and then we could kind of track and say, hey, why is this going down to 50? What's the deal here? And you can stay on top of it and understand that the project doesn't end at go live.
Great. I think that's such an incredibly important point. It's kind of like when you think about yourself in the physician's shoes, and let's say as a physician, I wanted secure chat. And to your point, if I went to security or ITU and said, hey, I want secure chat, it's going to help me streamline this whole paging issue. It's really frustrating for patients and all that. But when you're a security person, when you don't live that day to day, it's hard for you to truly empathize. But if a clinician went to security and said, hey, and by the way, it protects the data, it's safer, and there's a risk of, a breach or anything like that, then they'll go, oh, okay, so now I too want to solve this problem because this does affect my day to day. And it's obvious in hindsight, but to your point, when you're living in the weeds, you're kind of like very rationally self-interested. You're thinking about how is it going to help me? But we need someone like you, Greg, in the organization to be like, hey, we actually have to facilitate all these different perspectives and bring it together. It seems it's obvious, but it's very difficult to do.
Yeah,
that clarity that was really good.
That's 100% my job in a nutshell. I basically help ISD with the messaging, and I help our providers with the messaging to make sure that we're aligning incentives. Because really, at the end of the day, everybody is on the same team and heading in the same direction. There's just a lot of inertia that I think prevents us from getting there, more just because of the way we talk and present things.
And when we think about where digital health is going next, where, in the past, technology was very focused on the clinicians and the administrators and people in the organization. But now that we're getting more into digital health, and it's almost like there's this third stakeholder outside the four walls, the patient, who needs to be engaged digitally going forward, that adds another layer of complexity where it's, okay, I gotta answer what's in it for me for all three parties to use a digital health platform. How are you thinking through that one lately?
Yeah, so I think we're engaging a lot more with our communications and our patient experience team. I mean, we just hired a provider who is focusing totally on patient experience for our organization, pulling the right people together to make sure. I mean, there's a whole different you've got to be educating within the right language, the right culture, the right education level. I mean, it is a whole nother nut to crack. beyond just educating nurses and physicians.
Totally.
Yeah, if we thought two types of stakeholders were complicated, you had a third one in there. It sounds like
Yeah.
a it's a nice web there.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to get there, but it's going to be fun.
Yeah. So Greg, actually, maybe a good segue. I wanted to ask you, there's now this, especially post-COVID, just this explosion of patient-facing innovations. You have your chatbots, you have your digital care journeys, remote patient monitoring. I'm curious, like, what are you the most excited about regarding patient-facing innovations?
So I love chatbots.
Mm.
Absolutely love chatbots. We initiated one as part of our digital front door, initial phase of the digital transformation, to help with patients finding a provider. So to help our find a provider tool. But what I learned from that is that just by having that out there, and even we didn't really have it dialed in great. We didn't have great algorithms associated with it. But the most important thing we got out of that was that we understood how patients were searching for us and what they were searching for. And so you could understand what terms they were using, what types of things. I mean, we found out that the most common reason people actually came to the website to look for things was actually related to dental, and we didn't even have anything dental on our website. We have a great dental school and openings and all of that stuff. And so it was just extremely informative. And so now, thinking about leveraging that in other ways to, again, if you want to know what your patients need, ask them. And this is one way for them to tell you without you having to actually, pick up the phone and ask. You're collecting it more passively. So I think as a source of information for us, it's been outstanding. And obviously, it's very easy to use and something that the patients really like. Something I'm not as high on is just the remote patient monitoring. I think that again, we have tons of data. And frankly, you don't need new data to tell you about the same problems that you always knew you had. You make sure that you're asking the right questions and that you're actually trying to use the technology to solve a fundamental problem for your organization. And with the remote patient monitoring, I just haven't seen a lot of good evidence about broad uses where that significantly drives improved patient outcomes or changes management terribly significantly. And so I think we're kind of focusing on other areas right now. I mean, the biggest things that I'm excited about is for me, another thing I would love to delete. I'd love to delete the computer and the mouse from the ambulatory clinic. I mean, it is sucking the life out of medicine. The doctors there typing and clicking and pointing into the electronic health record basically to enter data for the learning health system. Well, you've got a patient with a scowl on their face staring at the back of the doctor's head. Doctor's miserable, patient's miserable. And so using, ambient technology to just have a conversation and have that collect the data. And oh, by the way, doctors and nurses suck at entering structured data. Computers and devices are great at doing that. And
Right.
so not only do you give providers time to do what they do best, which is, educate and communicate with empathy and compassion, you also allow the technology to do what it does best, which is enter the structured data to give us the insights that we want in the future to give better care for that patient. So I think, that's something I'm excited about. Optical intelligence, extremely excited about that, related to any kind of flow issues. Our nurses, I think there's potential for great opportunity there. The nurses are spending 50% of their time typing things into flow sheets, 30% of time looking for stuff, and 20% of time in patient care. Well, that 80% where they're typing into flow sheets and looking for stuff can be handled a lot with the optical intelligence. We've got checklists for checklists, right now. And
Jeez.
checklists improve quality significantly. But
Mm.
you know, if you're trying to do an A line these days as a nurse, you've got the A line checklist. But before you can get to the A line checklist, you've got to do the prep the skin site checklist, and it's just click after click after
Mhm.
click. Um, Leveraging some of these technologies to help that happen with virtual nursing or that sort of thing, I think has a lot of promise for us.
You
That's
know what
really cool.
strikes me as very interesting from that point, Greg, is in lots of other industries, typically like we'll see adoption of new technologies for like outside healthcare, and solve some kind of either similar or analogous use cases, and then eventually migrate its way into healthcare. But what's funny is that when I think about ambient technology, like let's take our company for a second. We have meetings, we take notes, and for some reason, I have yet to see lots of companies adopt ambient technology for, let's call it, documentation of meetings or other things internally. And I'm wondering why that hasn't happened yet. And I'm thinking maybe it's almost a bigger pain point in medicine and healthcare. Like I can't remember that many times in our company where people are complaining like, oh my gosh, I have to take all these notes. But it feels like a much bigger pain point in healthcare. Do you think that's why we haven't seen ambient in other industries, but it's really now a thing in healthcare? Or is there a different reason why we haven't maybe yet adopted that outside healthcare even?
Yeah, I think I kind of think along your lines where you've got one person taking notes for a meeting of 40 or 50 people, and they distribute the notes. Everybody's got a nice set of notes, and that just seems to work out
Mm.
well. And so, you know, automating that job um, for that purpose, and having the technology not quite be totally
Mhm.
perfect yet is probably more trouble than it's worth right now. But for the use case in medicine where it's every single visit, we know in our group for 15-minute visit you spend 7 minutes in
Yeah.
documentation, and that's 7 minutes that you're either doing after clinic, uh, on nights and weekends, or you're limiting your patient visit to 8 minutes
Mhm.
so you can have 7 minutes for documentation. And that time is extremely valuable any way you look at it. And so I think that's why it's become a bigger issue in healthcare.
Yeah.
That, and just the we know that documentation burden is one of the key drivers of burnout,
Yeah.
and that's such a big issue.
Makes
Totally
sense.
makes sense. Yeah. So Greg, just being mindful of your time, let's flip over to what we call the Fast Five lightning round. This is basically five questions to get to know you better for our audience. First question we have is, what is your favorite book or book you've gifted the most?
So I'll go with, yeah, the book I've gifted the most, and favorite book is Leading with Heart
Mm.
by Coach K.
Hmm.
So I'm a Dukely. Did my fellowship at
Yeah.
Duke, and I grew up being a huge basketball fan. I was in middle school and early high school during the Duke kind of glory
Mm.
years, and always went to bed at night envisioning that I was going to play Duke basketball, and I never made it there until I went through orthopedic surgery residency and then got a fellowship. And as part of the sports fellowship at Duke, you are the assistant team
Oh,
physician
sweet.
for all of Duke athletics. So I got to sit on the sideline,
Mm.
uh, literally like 13th on the bench, right next to the guys
Oh,
with the
wow.
towels that run onto
Huh.
the court and wipe up all the sweat. And before I started, Coach K gave us signed copies of that book,
Oh, wow.
and I read it, and it was awesome just watching kind of um, how deliberate he actually was. You would see things that he was doing with the team that you would think were just happening randomly,
Mm.
but they weren't.
Wow.
Because by reading the book, you kind of knew that okay, he has to build a team every 4 years,
Right.
and there's a process,
That's
and
cool.
there's like key things that have to happen to promote growth in his team, and relationships that he has to build with each member of the team and the greater group of people that supports the team.
Hmm.
And it was just very interesting, taking that book and that experience together.
Mm.
And so I think it's just very well written
Mm,
and translates extremely well to healthcare teams, I think, as
mm,
well. So
yeah.
I tend to have my team read that.
Did you watch the Redeem Team documentary?
I watched part of it, but I did not see the whole thing.
Huh. It's I mean, the whole thing is pretty good, and a lot of great Coach K stories about
Mm.
him transforming the culture of that Olympic team. Yeah, he's a phenomenal leader. I love that suggestion.
No, that's great. Question two, Greg. Who is a person, dead or alive, you'd love to meet?
That is a good question, and one that I have not thought about in quite a long time. I don't know.
I mean, we're happy skipping it if you want to.
Yeah, I don't.
You're content as is. You've met all the people you'd like to meet.
Where he
No.
met Coach K.
Yeah, exactly. This is a would you rather have super strength, super speed, or the ability to read people's minds?
Ooh, holy cow! That's always. This one's definitely something that I have not gotten into a conversation about since college, at least. And I think I've probably changed. Um, I think the ability to read people's minds would just drive me absolutely insane,
Mm,
and couldn't do that. I think I'd go with super speed,
mm,
especially if it's like the kind of speed like Superman has to
mm.
kind of spin the Earth
Oh yeah,
backwards and go back in
back in
time,
time.
or
Yeah.
the Flash, or just getting stuff done. Um,
You could do so many cases in the year, you know?
Yeah.
exactly. That's the orthopedic surgeon in me right
Great.
there for sure.
That's great. All right, question four, and I just have to say, Greg, I love how these are the questions that are stumping you, but the real technical questions that are, to do with all these advancements digitally, you have no problem knocking those out of the park. That's really funny to me. Question four, though, what is something in healthcare you believe that others might find insane?
So I think it goes back to that original thing that we were talking about. That you can actually train and learn surgery without being evaluated on how you actually technically perform
Mhm.
surgery. And what's insane is that patients will go to a surgeon for a rotator cuff repair, and they think that rotator cuff repair, no matter what surgeon they go to, is going to be performed with the
Mm,
exact same level of quality and expertise. Where the literature shows, for other similar operations, that up to 27% of your clinical outcome is predicated on the technical skill of the
wow.
surgeon performing the operation. And so I think it's definitely a quality issue for the boards and hospitals to be looking at. If you want to provide high quality care and good outcomes, you need to kind of have some measure of that.
Mm. Yeah, no, I love that. Last question that we have, Greg. This is more of a pandemic lockdown related question. What is one hobby or activity you've gotten into since the beginning of the pandemic?
Yeah, so my COVID hobby was that I picked up the guitar.
Oh, nice.
It's something I always wanted to do. And so I grabbed an acoustic guitar and I went online and found this Justin Guitar
Okay.
guy, and really liked his method because you could start playing songs really from day one. He taught you three
Wow.
chords initially, you practice the chords, and then you could play the song, and they were all arranged for your level. So the
Right.
first one sounded absolutely awful, but you could kind of tell you were playing the song.
Cool.
And over a year or so, I got to be able to play some songs, and it's really relaxing just to go into the back room and
Mm.
really kind of strum away.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. It's such a different like skill set while still, using your brain in a way that expresses creativity and gets you moving all the moving parts. Greg, did you want us to come back to that earlier question? Person you would love to meet?
Yeah, no, I just don't have anything like super
Fair.
good. But if you ask everybody all the 5 questions and we just skip that one on me, then I'll feel less than. But that's all right. I know you guys got to go, and that won't
Yeah.
be a good answer from me.
No, it's fine. That's totally fine.
I'll have
Um,
to ponder it.
yeah, that's great. Well, Greg, I want to thank you again for coming on this show. That's a wrap for this episode of The Digital Patient, hosted by SeamlessMD. You can follow us on Twitter at SeamlessMD. And if you like the podcast and you want to learn more, you can visit www.seamless.md. Greg, honestly, thanks so much for sharing the pearls of wisdom in this conversation. I know our audience is going to take a lot away from it, and I certainly did as well. So thanks so much for sharing your time.
Yeah, I really appreciate you guys having me on. It was a great conversation, really fun.